Kashmir conjures up a discomfiting mixture of images of unremitting Himalayan beauty and its decades-long separatist violence. It's easy to get sucked into the complex historical forces that have overwhelmed everyday life. Instead of doing that, writer and filmmaker Mehak Jamal chose to reach out to Kashmiris who navigate the unique challenges of living a measure of normal life in the giant shadow of Kashmir's relentless conflict. The result is her remarkable debut-making book, Loal Kashmir, Love and Longing in a Torn Land, that chronicles personal stories of what she describes as love, loss and longing. Incidentally, Loal in Kashmiri means love. A child of mixed parentage with a Kashmiri Muslim father and Maharashtrian Hindu mother, the Mumbai-based Mehak was born in Srinagar, where she spent many years and continues to visit the valley regularly. She spoke to Mehak Chai Reports from Mumbai. Welcome to Mehak Chai Reports. Mehak, it's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me and for your interest in my book.
Oh, you're always welcome. Uh, Congratulations on your debut-making collection of stories from Kashmir. Quite fascinated by what I've read so far.
Thank you.
A thread that runs through all your stories is your ability to listen with great attention and even empathy for those who are telling their stories. That's evident in details that you capture, say, for instance, in the story of this title Visa.
Yeah,
Uh, Tell me how you retain genuine interest in other people's stories.
like like how I retain
Yeah,
my.
because it's an effort to get into somebody else's life to begin with. I mean, I'm sure it builds up into something interesting, but to begin with, it's a bit of an effort for anyone else.
Hmm. I think see, I I've been the book is out now, but I've been working on this project. I would say for the past 4 years almost, and I started in December 2020, and I started collecting these stories. I started interviewing people, talking to them around that time, and I think so. Yeah, so most of those stories have been collected around 2020 and 2021, and a few later, only when I had gotten into when I decided that it was going to be a book, and I knew that I wanted to look for specific stories. That's when I went out, to look for them again. Um, but why I was interested in finding these stories and telling them was really because I was intrigued by how love changes in a place of conflict, or how it's affected in a place of conflict when it's not given as much importance of everything else which is happening around these people. And even though it's seen as something separate from the unrest itself, it is very much affected by it, and as and yeah, as an extension of it, I think. And so I think when I was interviewing different people and all the different contributors, um, genuinely I think I was very surprised about how they opened up to me in many ways. And I don't know whether it has to do with the questions I was asking or the way I was asking them, but I was genuinely surprised. And as those conversations went ahead, I my curiosity also grew. So that's why I feel that genuine interest kind of never really went down. And also because I am a filmmaker and I'm
Right.
a very visual thinker, I could see those stories kind of unfolding in front of me while these people were speaking. So I was already writing it in my head, and I knew that okay, this is how it's going to start, this is how it's going to end, this is the point where it's going to end. So that way, and so I think that also dictated what kind of questions I asked them, and it really kept me focused on what is it's that I am asking these people because I wanted to get stories and ask people questions which they themselves felt like they haven't been asked before, or nobody's taken that kind of interest in their life before. And I think they were equally surprised by the project and me as I was by their retelling um, of their experiences.
What's been your assessment of how, in the time of conflict, love, longing, and loss play out in a place like Kashmir? Does it get accentuated? Does it get distorted? People come closer because of the conflict. I'm sure there are several consequences to any conflict when it comes to these emotions.
Yeah, I think it can affect it for the better or for the worse. There are a lot of stories in the book where the people in them have not ended up together, and there are many in which they have as well, and they're married, they have children, and there are people who just lost touch and haven't seen each other in decades. So there are all sorts of stories, and also uh, not just restricted to romantic love, also platonic love between two friends, or love between parents and their children, and also love for a land, love for your homeland. Even that is there in the book. Um, and I feel like in all of and they are unique in their own separate and different ways. um, and I feel that yes, love does get affected in a place like Kashmir, because often when there is so much uncertainty around you, especially in like really short periods of time, like for example, after the abrogation of Article 370, which happened in 2019, when there was a big communication blockade, and those stories actually take up the majority of the book towards the end. Um, there were months and months upon which there was complete silence, and there were no phone lines, or there was no internet. So at that time, in all that um, you know that vacuum that you're feeling, you're looking for a constant in your life. So you're looking for that person who is going to be there at the end of this ordeal. So I feel like I found that a common thing in a lot of these stories, where having that person in your life really helps you um, get through these periods, because you have another person who understands what you're going through. And yeah, and these similar experiences, and as lovers going through them together, I think have shaped a lot of these stories for better or for worse, I feel.
Did you come across any examples where, especially in the aftermath of the abrogation of the two articles, 370 and 35A, that there were people who uh, were brought together by shared concerns over what might happen in the aftermath of that? And some of that may have led to sort of either affection, platonic or otherwise, and that it became an abiding relationship.
um I mean, I can't think of one of the top of my head. I know
Mhm.
that a lot of connections were made because of the abrogation, because people were trying to communicate with family back home. So a
Right.
lot of Kashmiris who were living outside the valley found a lot of people who were traveling back and forth to send messages across. So that is a lot, like those stories I've heard a lot of. And oh, actually, but one particular thing comes to mind. In one of the stories, which is called Fight or Flight. It's about a flight attendant, and she's a flight attendant with Saudi Airlines,
Mhm.
and she's outside the country. She's just flown out of Kashmir, and the abrogation happens, and she can't connect to her parents back home. And she finds various people to connect with her family, because at that time these satellite phones were working. So she would find people who had these satellite phones and try to talk to them, but more often than not, these things wouldn't really work out. And even when landlines slowly started working, there would be a long queue for somebody to make even a 60-second call. So she went through all of these ups and downs till she found a family very close to her parents' house who had a landline phone. So her family would go to that person's person's house and call her, and they would actually have the freedom to sit there and talk for not talk for hours, but at least talk without the fear that they're eating into somebody else's time
Right.
who's eating as well. And because of that, those families actually grew closer together to each other because they were forming this link to for this girl's parents to be able to call her. So once she came back and she met her family again, she met these people, this family was for the first time. Even though they probably lived very close to each other, she had never really seen them or met them. And the families kind of made the unbreakable bond
Mhm.
because of the application. Yeah,
I see. You live in two contrasting places. You have lived in two contrasting places in Kashmir and in Bombay. Uh,
yeah.
this is a bit of a speculative inquiry. Do you think love develops differently in a place where there is an ongoing conflict for over 3 decades now, and a place that is so businesslike, which wants to just get on with life? Do you think they develop differently, even longing or even loss?
Um, yeah, of course. I think we do. There are a lot of things at the base level that can be very similar in relationships. But what happens often in Kashmir is that a lot of people, they might have been brought together in circumstances when there isn't civil unrest happening outside, but they have also been through those trying times. They haven't been able to meet each other or talk to each other for elongated periods of time, and that comes from actually being from Kashmir itself, because you've gone through that even when you weren't dating somebody or you weren't with
Right.
somebody. So I think it comes from being from a place like that itself, which I feel like in if you take a place like Bombay, people haven't grown up like that or they haven't had those experiences. So it's from that very core, I would say it would be quite different how these relationships emerge. And I think like in one of the stories in my book, there is a wedding happening in which there's a Kashmiri guy and girl from Delhi, and an abrogation happens and everything is shut down. And the family of that girl is like really scared. They have to leave immediately, but they don't know what's going to happen to their daughter. And even though the boy's family know that everything will be fine, like she's going to be safe, but even that little thing, um, which is totally uncalled for and is unknown for somebody who is from the mainland, who doesn't really understand the lay of the land in Kashmir, um, how they perceive it is very different. And I think, for example, I mean, I don't want to compare the two things,
Right.
but I think what couples felt in COVID,
Uh-huh.
probably when they couldn't see each other and they were, social distancing and probably carrying out the relationships over the internet. That is maybe like 10% of what somebody in Kashmir would be going through when they are going through these elongated um, periods of conflict, because it's not just about not being able to speak to somebody. It's also about the volatility of what is happening outside them, and not really knowing whether they're going to see the next day, or if the world outside outside as they know it is going to be the same for them anymore. So it's
Right.
all of those parameters as well.
Yeah. When it comes to real life stories being told by those involved in them, oftentimes the narration is disjointed because that's how generally people talk. There is no particular structure in the way we understand stories. What were
Yeah.
your challenges as a writer to make them cohesive? Give them a sort of a structure that one can understand in a book.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest challenges that
Right.
I had. People talk very non-linearly, and
Right.
you might ask one question, but they'll start off in like 2010, but they'll end up in 1990 or something like that, right? And then yeah, so it is all over the place, but it's, I think it's also one of the things which I enjoyed most doing, which was, making sense of what a person has told me. And because I'm a screenwriter as well, and I write stories which have a beginning, middle, and end. I felt like that really came into handy for me when I was writing these stories, because I knew, because I could see the structure very well for myself. And even in some cases, when I was talking to people and interviewing them, I some of my questions were guided by that. When I felt like, okay, this story is not going to seem complete when I write it, I would ask more questions, and I ask more
Mm.
probing questions if they would want to answer. Of course, not overstep, but ask for details where necessary. Like ask, like, oh, do you remember what she was wearing? And even if it's like 30 years ago, they would
Right.
remember it. So these are, like, these are details which make the stories real, even while you're reading them, because it is a piece of narrative nonfiction. It's not just nonfiction. The way I've written them, they are almost short stories on their own. The only thing is they are real. And so yeah, and I also gave into that gave into not knowing,
Right.
because the thing is, a lot of times people tell you what they remember, also what they want to tell you, right? They're not going to remember exact dialogues, or sorry, not
Right.
dialogues, exact wordings of what they said to another person, and I can't make those things up myself. So there are a lot of beats in these stories which are not there, which are missing, but I don't feel it while I'm reading it, because that is what I know, and I can't embellish. Wherever I can, maybe write something from my own experience while describing a place or a object or something, that I've done. But a conversation between two people, I can't recreate it by myself. And maybe, like, for example, you read the love letter chapter. I didn't know what's written in the love letter, but I
Indeed.
don't think that but I don't think it took away from what the story was saying. So that's what I've realized while writing a piece of nonfiction, is that there is a lot of beauty in the silences, in the gaps, where the reader can really make up things on their own. And even though creating the narrative and creating sense out of what people were saying, and I mean, of course, each chapter has gone through multiple writings. One would be just writing everything down somebody said. The second time would be actually creating sense out of it. The third time would be writing it in a way that would actually sound like a story. And then the fourth round would be actually, okay, checking everything. So
Right.
I think each chapter has gone through at least 4 or 5 rounds of that to reach the place it has right now.
Yeah, you mentioned the love letter thing. In fact, not knowing what Javed wrote makes it even more compelling. It leaves it to your imagination what he might have written in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's what I thought when I was reading it. Yeah, 5 years past the little over 5 years past the abrogation of the two articles. What's your sense about how the political tumult in Kashmir has impacted people culturally and even especially beyond politics?
Um, Culturally, can you expand
Uh,
on culture?
because it for decades it was used to being a special status state, right? Which led to a, I mean, in my s- frequent visits for nearly 10 years at the height of the insurgency, I could feel that they had a sort of a sense of entitlement of being special. Now that has been taken away from them. I'm sure there would be some cultural shift that would happen, that they would think that we are just another state now or another place within the union. And that I'm sure has some impact, at least politically, and those who practice politics as a matter of profession.
No, I wouldn't say that there is a sense of entitlement which the people from Kashmir had about having special status, because I mean, that goes back to the accession to India and everything about that. Uh, but the main thing which came about when when the articles were abrogated, and also it's important to know that those articles which came into being in whatever 1953 or something, they have been diluted over the years, so they were
Right.
barely a skeleton of what they were when they had come into being. Um, but the main issue which Kashmiris were struggling with was with um, that this would lead to a demographic change in the valley and post the abrogation. And the article itself gave them a sense of security that this is their place and this is their land and nobody will be able to push them out of here. And I think that is what really angered the people when it happened, and the way it happened when everybody, like tourists and everybody, was flown out of there, and only the Kashmiris were left, and then they were all their phones and internet and everything was cut off, and then they barely even knew what was happening and like what was meted out to them, and only a few people must have found out who had like a DTH television connection. Otherwise, people themselves didn't know that what was happening to the land that they're living in. And uh, and uh, Jammu and Kashmir was made into a union territory, which it still is. It hasn't gotten its statehood back, and Ladakh is a separate union territory. And the the first legislative assembly elections have happened after 10 years.
Right.
Last in just like in October or November of last year, right? Um, so in terms of the changes which I have noticed in Kashmir post the abrogation is more of a sense of false normalcy,
I
which
see.
is which is peddled a lot in the media, that everything is okay on ground, and that is also because journalism isn't um, allowed to be free over there. There are a lot of people who are jailed, who are not allowed to fly out of the country, and there is a lot of censorship which is happening in Kashmir. A lot of archives, older archives of newspapers, which are disappearing, which aren't there anymore. So I think that is what I feel, that there is a pall of normalcy, false normalcy, which
Right.
is always in the same sentence as Kashmir nowadays. And the people over there know that, you know, at the heart of hearts, they know that maybe nothing for them has changed, but they have to just follow what's happening over there, and the sense that's the sense that I am getting, that people are more cautious and
Right.
more worried about who's listening to them, what are they, if are they going to misconstrue what they're saying, is something going to made into propaganda, what is going to happen. I
Hmm.
mean, there are people who I interviewed for the book who chose to retract their stories, and people who I had to, also convince to keep their stories in the book, because even they weren't sure whether they wanted to tell these stories anymore, only in a span of a couple of years, and that has changed for them. And that doesn't come from a place where people feel secure, I would
Right.
say. And I wouldn't call that normal, but that is the word which is thrown around
Yeah.
there all the time now.
Right.
So yeah.
No, interest. It's fascinating from what I've read so far. You were born in Srinagar to a Kashmiri Muslim father and Maharashtrian Hindu mother, as you write early on. How has that mixed parentage influenced the way you approach Kashmir as a long-standing conflict zone?
Um, well, I grew up over there,
Hmm.
and like while growing up, also because then I was born in the 90s, but I think I did a lot of my growing up in the 2000s, and around that time, because the militancy had quietened down by that time, I don't think while we were growing up, any of us really knew about the Kashmir conflict in all of its entirety. And it's only around 2008, 2009 when the Amarnath Nalandrao happened, when the Matsil Fake encounter happened, and we were plunged into civil unrest almost every summer, is when, we started realizing that we come from a place of conflict. Of course, there are those things which you see every day and you don't realize this is not normal because there's a huge army presence in Kashmir, and they're almost part of the scenery. And these are not normal things, but we grew up with them. We grew up with, okay, hearing that, oh, there was a bomb blast somewhere, there's a grenade blast somewhere, there was a tear gas attack, and there's an encounter somewhere, and we heard all of these things, but the actual impact of it really happened when, I think in the late 2010s, sorry, or the late 2000s, when these summers of unrest started happening. And so my understanding of the conflict also has started from there and evolved from there. Of course, being from a mixed heritage, I've always felt a little bit of confusion about just where I belong. But because I grew up in Kashmir, I always felt I belonged to Kashmir much more than anywhere else, and I still feel that. But I do feel that uh, I always take more of an effort to educate myself about what is happening in Kashmir, what's happening with Kashmir, because I feel that sense of forgetting, or maybe going away from my roots
Right.
sometimes. And I think writing this book has really brought me closer to Kashmir again, and made me understand it in ways which I wouldn't have before, and also found an acceptance from people for myself. And of course, I felt that dichotomy for myself while growing up, because I spent a lot of time in Bombay as well, and then go back home to Kashmir, and I saw a very different environment on both sides. But from a very young age, I had to educate and learn and really understand of where I stand and how I look at the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Just last couple of things. One is, of course, how do you think Kashmiris in the valley in their 20s, who have basically only known conflict, how do you think they are looking at the last 5 years? You mentioned demographic shift, which is perhaps early days, but it hasn't happened in any significant way. It's not as if Indians from elsewhere has overrun Kashmir yet. That was one of the fears I heard even when I used to report.
Hmm.
It could happen in the next 10, 15, 20 years. No one can tell right now. But how do you think youngsters in Kashmir look at Kashmir now?
Um, I think firstly, I think I'm not sure about the exact demographic shift, but there are laws which have come into place. There is a lot of forest land which is being taken over by the army slowly, which you kind of don't really know, which you don't really know about, it doesn't make it to the news. But all of these things are happening in the background for sure. So which have been made possible because of the abrogation of the article. So I don't think those fears were uncalled for, or it is happening slowly, but it is happening surely. And coming to the second question of people in their 20s, and who have grown 20s and 30s, I would say, who
Yeah.
have really grown up in the conflict. Um, Sorry, what was your question about them?
No,
How do they?
how do they look at, especially the last 5 years? Do they think there is any change for better or for worse?
Um, See, because I don't live in Kashmir, and I don't on a regular basis, and I visit from time to time, so I don't know the exact situation on the
Right.
ground, like everyday situation. But I do get the feeling that there is a lot of angst in the people, because yes, on one end, everything, like there haven't been any big hartals or anything in Kashmir for the past couple of years, and like I said, the call of normalcy is there everywhere. But I think the youngsters also haven't forgotten about what has happened in their past, and they do want to speak up, and they have that connection with their identity as Kashmiris, and they want to create uh, create art, create things which are significant to Kashmir. And I mean, of course, people have flourished in many ways. There are a lot of entrepreneurs and artists and musicians who are coming from the valley and have over the past couple of years. But I don't think anybody is under the false belief that or has forgotten
Right.
what has happened in the past. I would say.
Yeah, but that itself is a noteworthy development that people on the artistic side, be it literature, be it painting, be it any number of things, who have begun to not assert but at least reveal or pursue those identities. I think that that can have a profound effect on in the next 30, 40 years if that continues. People from that part of, yeah, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think literature and art and music are the tools, so to speak, of soft power which we have, right? In times
Absolutely.
when when like big things like journalism and big media is, if it's throttled at any point, I think it's really the personal stories of people which can really help document a history of a people, and I think it is as important as like a photojournalist doing their job, and I think
Absolutely.
it's equally important, and I think that is also one of the reasons why I started writing this book was to collect memories of conflict, of living through a conflict, because those are the things which are very fickle and they can change, and people forget. They forget their experiences. They won't forget maybe what had happened, but in their memory, maybe yours can just blur into each other. And I felt documenting the history of a people has to rely as much on the facts and figures as it has to do
Right.
on the lived memories. And I see a lot of people doing that, and not just in fiction as well, in writing fiction, in short stories, in writing memoirs, in making films, in making documentaries, in making art, illustrations and murals, and making music. And I think it is all a part of just not forgetting our history, our all our and our memories. And I think that is a beautiful thing in itself, because in itself you are uh, not denying what Kashmir is, and and I think there have been a lot of efforts to deny the on ground situation in the valley, and iron over a lot of things. And I think the youth in the valley, like you said, in the 20s and their 30s, are striving to undo that really,
Right.
and to tell their stories in whatever way they can.
On that note, Mehak, I want to thank you for your time. It was wonderful to have engaged you on this. My congratulations once again on your book. May it become a bestseller, rake in a lot of money, which is important, and most importantly, continue to tell stories like that from a deeply conflicted state.
Thank you so much for your interest in Mayank, and it was lovely speaking to you again and about a different thing altogether and a different medium. And yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for
No, it's a pleasure. Pleasure.